Okay, welcome everyone to the Fall 2019 meeting of the ACRL Digital Badges Interest Group. Today we're going to be hearing from Taylor Kendal, who's going to be presenting on a reframing of value and trust in the new learning economy. So we welcome everyone who is able to join us today. Before our presentation, we have two ACRL candidates with us today, Lynn Connaway and Julie Garrison, who are standing for the office of Vice President, President-elect. They are going to briefly introduce themselves and answer any questions that you may have for them. We are then going to have our presentation, which will be followed by a Q&A at the end of the hour. So because you do not have microphone privileges, if you have any questions as you are listening to the presentation, please type them into the chat, and Tori will be moderating our questions and relaying those to Taylor at the end of the presentation. So we're going to make sure we leave at least 10 minutes for that Q&A portion of our presentation. I'm Kelsey O'Brien. I'm co-convener of this group with Tori Raish. We also have our outgoing convener, Emily Rimland, who could not join us today, but Tori and I are here. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat or reach out to us. We're always happy to get suggestions. There's Tori. If you have any suggestions for this group, we are also always looking for an incoming convener. So if you would like to join us in leading this interest group, we would welcome you to reach out to us and let us know. This group provides resources related to digital badges, and we are focused on academic libraries, but we welcome anyone who is interested in this topic to explore our resources. We typically host 2 virtual meetings, one in the fall and one in the spring. Anyone's welcome to attend these presentations and discussions. We also have a LibGuide that includes a variety of resources that you're welcome to explore. We have a bibliography on digital badges literature that we update regularly. We also have a blog space, so if you would like to share your experiences or if you have any ideas related to digital badges that you want to share, please let us know and we would be happy to have you contribute a blog post or anything else that you'd like to share with the group. So we are now going to have a Q&A with our 2 guests today. So I welcome Lynn and Julie to introduce yourselves, and if you do have any questions for them, please type them into the chat and we will make sure that they that we relay those questions to them, or they can keep an eye on the chat as well. So I'm going to pass it on.
Thank you, Kelsey and Victoria, for providing this time for Julie and I to meet with the Digital Badges Interest Group. And I am Lynn Silipigni Connaway, and I am the Director of Library Trends and User Research at OCLC. And I am honored to be invited to stand for ACRL Vice President, President-elect. I really believe that we should leverage the collective power of ACRL so that we can contribute more effectively to the mission and goals of our academic and local communities. And by this, I mean not only looking at student and faculty's academic needs, but also addressing their personal, everyday life experience needs. I also really believe that we need to be focusing on being proactive instead of reactive, so that we're able to respond to diverse users' changing expectations and needs. And I wanted to talk a little bit about my involvement. I've been with ALA and ACRL. So I have been a member of ALA since I was a master's student at the University of Arizona. And I became a member of ACRL when I was a junior faculty member, and then went on to be a faculty member and director of the LIS program at the University of Denver. And when I first joined, I remember my excitement, especially as a student. And I still feel this excitement and a privilege of having the opportunity to be a part of ALA and ACRL. And I believe that voting in our association is one of the privileges and of being a member, because this is another way for us to be able to shape ACRL's strategic plans and goals. And Julie and I looked at the voting statistics from the past 10 years for ACRL. And in the past 10 years, only between 22 and 26% of the ACRL membership have voted in our elections. There was a 3% decrease in voting members from 2018 to 2019. And so if you remember anything about our discussion today, I hope it is that you will remember that I am encouraging you to vote, regardless of who you choose on the ballot. But really, I would encourage you to take advantage of this privilege of ACRL membership. So thank you again for giving me this time, and I will turn it over to Julie Garrison.
Thank you, Lynn. I absolutely want to reiterate what Lynn said. Voting is key and engagement is key. And I think that we both stand together in feeling as though the association is in great hands, and we stand for election together, even though it's one or the other of us who would be invited to be the vice president, president-elect. I want to thank the Digital Badges Interest Group as well for allowing us the opportunity to introduce ourselves as ACRL presidential candidates. My name is Julie Garrison, as Lynn said, and Kelsey before her, and I currently serve as Dean of Libraries at Western Michigan University. I think back to when I received my degree, and it was during a time of significant shift from the print to the electronic world in libraries. And a lot was changing 24 years ago, and that hasn't stopped, of course. And you know, early on, I became acutely aware of the value of agility and adaptability in our profession, and also the value of that community of peers to continually learn with. I see that our pace of change has only persisted and quickened in our profession. And I feel that this is the same in society as well. Being connected to a professional community where we're collectively keeping an eye out for the issues and the challenges and the opportunities ahead has been the most valuable thing to me in my career. Whether this was early on in my career as a medical librarian involved with the Medical Library Association, or after I moved into an academic setting and connected with ACRL as my home a little bit later, maybe than Lynn did in her career. I believe strongly, as Lynn was mentioning earlier, that we do need to expand how we conceive of that professional community, and feel there's some urgency around extending our conversations beyond ACRL, forging alliances with other library and higher education groups to solve some of our global challenges. We are often solving separately, or we're often adapting each other's ideas and projects. And I think that we could work more efficiently and effectively if we start together, identifying our common challenges and developing more integrated solutions, or maybe pushing boundaries together where we have intersections and we're in need of a grand revolution. So I think even about the program that you have today, about the value and trust in education. And when I looked at Taylor Kendal's work and saw the intersections between how he's worked with libraries, higher education, and government, I think, how are we part of the ecosystem that needs to help to solve this? So as president, I would really want to work on building more tightly connected library and higher education communities, and focus in on building an innovative and agile set of thinkers and best practitioners to solve these things. I really think our strength is in our diversity of perspectives and talents, and believe that we need to develop a thriving collective future together. So that's sort of opening statements, and Lynn and I are happy to ask questions or answer questions. We could ask questions too, but that might not be quite as helpful. And we know that you have a program, so we don't want to take too much of your time. So. Kelsey, I can turn it back over to you, maybe?
Sure, yeah. If anyone has any questions, I'm not seeing any in the chat right now, but please, if you think of any, feel free to put them in the chat. I'm sure Julie and Lynn would be happy to have you reach out to them later as well. But if you do want to put it in the chat, I'd also be happy to pass those questions along. And thank you, Julie and Lynn, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And it looks like Taylor perhaps does have a question for you. How does the role of libraries change in 3, 5, or 10 years from now?
Well, this is Lynn, and I believe that libraries are changing very rapidly and continually. I think part of it, and I think Julie touched on this, and I did too, is this whole sense of broadening our communities, whether they're within education and higher education, within the primary through secondary schools, and within our local communities. I think it's really important today to address, and it's going to be more important in the future with the deluge of information, to help individuals learn how to avoid misinformation, how to identify credible sources for not just their academic lives, but for their personal lives. I think we have to address the issues on campus as well. We have students who are hungry and students who need housing. And so I think as libraries, we need to be looking at more of issues, not just with teaching and learning, but also with the human everyday needs, and to branch out and start speaking to others outside of just our communities. I'll let Julie speak now.
Yeah, I would echo some of the things that Lynn mentioned and just say, really, I think that we will be more blended. We already see that in our higher education settings, where within libraries, we're really this sort of academic hub outside of the classroom, and we're providing much more than people would traditionally think of coming from libraries. I see that so much of what's happening in public library systems, or so much of what we're seeing as struggles in our K through 12 really do impact us in our kinds of libraries. And so I just imagined really an opportunity to have a more combined ecosystem. Right now we seem to be fairly separate, and I think there will be more fluidity in how users come into and out of our spaces and use our resources and our services, and also just whether or not they even know that they're touching a library when they do it. I think that's something that's often getting lost, and so how do we help to educate our society about what it is that they're getting when we're involved. So I'll just stop there.
All right, well, thank you both so much for sharing your thoughts and introducing yourselves to our audience today. Again, if anyone has any other questions, I'd be happy to relay them. And I thank Lynn and Julie for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Kelsey.
All right, so I'd like to introduce our speaker now, Taylor Kendal. Taylor is an educator, writer, designer, improviser, community developer, techno-philosopher, and chief strategy officer at Learning Economy. His work with the U.S. Department of Education, U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, Library of Congress, Metropolitan State University of Denver, and the University of Colorado, Denver, has led to a complex love affair with education, innovation, design, and decentralized future-focused networks. He holds an MA in Information Learning Technologies from CU Denver and has 20 years of experience in project event management, digital social strategy, instructional LX design, culture crafting, improvising, and systems level hacking of post-secondary education. So welcome, Taylor. We are really looking forward to your talk today. And I'm going to pass my screen along to you so you can share your slides.
Perfect. Thank you, Kelsey and others, and just for the opportunity to come and share some of my work. I'm realizing that's a bio that often ends up in spots that's meant to be read, and when it's read back, I'm like, man, it just sounds like a convoluted mess of things I'm working
Very impressive.
Anyway, so thanks for the opportunity. Let me go ahead and get my screen shared here, and let's start the slides. 1 second. There we go. Cool. Give me an indication if you're not seeing the slides, but I'm seeing them, so I think they should be up now.
Looks good to me.
Awesome. So thank you to ACRL and just the Digital Badges Interest Group, as well as I think probably Tori and also Megan Kohler. We had a conversation that I think sort of led to this presentation. So thanks to them as well. A quick bit of background, and then this will likely be very high level. I just want to give some sort of framing and context on some of what I've seen evolve recently and how it intersects with some of my work, and then want to certainly just leave a fair amount of time for questions. So drop those in as we go. I would love to dig into as much of that as possible. I'll probably keep this at 25, 30 minutes and leave a fair amount of time for questions. Another thing I'll say is I spent a decade working on a grant project called Teaching with Primary Sources that was funded by the Library of Congress. There is a deep piece of me at the core of my soul that like will never go away, that appreciates everything both libraries and librarians represent in this evolving digital economy of learning. And so any opportunity to sort of chat with groups that are in this space, as much as it's not as aligned to where I'm at these days, we'll always make time for it. So thanks. I will also echo Lynn and Julian saying, yes, vote, both here within this group, but also beyond. It's an important time to make sure our voices are heard. So I've been working recently, have spent a lot of time in universities, sort of directly doing faculty development or course design, sort of inside the system, but recently had opportunities to sort of step away and explore how other intersecting technologies and communities can ultimately influence the sort of system that is education, and that is data sharing, and that is just learning in the 21st century. So a few projects that were mentioned, did some work at the U.S. Department of Education that gave a really interesting lens into some of the sort of evolving policy work. The T3 Innovation Network, which the logo is represented here, through the Chamber of Commerce Foundation, are doing a lot in exploring some of what the future holds, and sort of building out new groups that can really start to implement pilots and learn about how things are changing. And then the last piece there, Learning Economy, is also a project that I'm tied into, that I will kind of dig into a little later, that I think represents a really exciting opportunity to rethink how value and trust are really being redefined before our eyes in a lot of ways. So that's sort of broad framing here. This will be high level, but happy to happy to chat later or offline on some details. So wanted to just sort of lay some groundwork up front and just level set. Everything I'll sort of work through is certainly aligned to some of the goals all the way up to the Department of Education in enabling lifelong and life-wide learning. I think that's the life-wide piece is an interesting addition that I think is really important. So certainly sort of, learning is occurring in new ways across the entire sort of temporal spectrum of our lives, but also creating more width in the ways that opportunities are presented. Libraries represent such an important piece of that width. It's not, learning is not just occurring within sort of a singular traditional path, at sort of schools and institutions that we're familiar with. So just a little bit of framing up front. This I think really is sort of the common story in a lot of ways, and also some framing. Badges are certainly a piece of this broader story, but I'm kind of taking a pretty broad landscape perspective. So badges are sort of an element of this evolving ecosystem, but I probably won't sort of stay aligned to badges uniquely. So, this is really a common story of a learner these days, and multiple records, having to sort of navigate a lot of the legacy systems that make sort of transfer of demonstration of knowledge just really challenging. How knowledge and skills are interpreted at different, whether it be a library or different schools or in the workplace, there's a lot of variability in the way that data is sort of interpreted, and certainly informal learning that happens in many places. Again, libraries are a place that an overwhelming amount of learning occurs, but it's sort of seen as this other type for some reason, right? It's like these informal learning opportunities sort of don't filter into the traditional demonstrated degree or credential that ultimately leads to jobs. So I think this is sort of the landscape and the common story we're dealing with. And through that process, there's just a lot of difficulty in adjusting with these sort of handoff and trade-offs of credentials and skills. Migrant students, homeless populations, certainly, folks that are transitioning, looking to sort of upskill coming out of the military, first gen, low income. There's, this is really the majority in a lot of ways of learners and students. And yet there's just a lot of friction in handing off means of demonstrating skills and abilities within all of those populations. And so that's sort of the current reality. And I think the hope is that some of what I'll present is at least indication that there is opportunity to change and a lot of exciting new projects, new technologies evolving that allow badges certainly being a part of this, that just allow some of this to change in a way that's useful to more learners across, again, lifelong and life-wide opportunities. So I before I go on, I do want to also echo Lynn sorry, I think it was Julie that said, we really need to keep an eye on issues, challenges, as well as opportunities. So I'm hoping to kind of hit on all of those pieces because this is, I get excited. I've tried to scale back. I see this, really shiny object that could be coming, and there are challenges certainly, and issues we have to address along the way. So I appreciate the sort of full scope that it's all of those things, issues, challenges, and opportunities. So with all of sort of that background, I think this is sort of the system as it currently exists in a lot of ways. As we connect students from the workplace to, from their educational setting to the workplace, and it's just a challenge. And I think we've all had experiences, I certainly have, where either I had to make a connection through a relationship, or it was a very lucky in some ways, email that filtered through that ultimately led to this discussion. That it's just a sort of tangled mess, and to no one's fault. This is the sort of evolving system that just is complicated. But this is the reality I think we currently deal with. There's just a lot of tangled wires, and I think there's opportunity to at least start to untangle some of these. So this is a sort of near future view at what sort of transcripts and representations of knowledge and skills could look like. We're moving into an era where having a mobile profile, a sort of student-owned profile that demonstrates a lot of skills that may or may not be gained within a traditional setting, be it a school or university or college, community college. So this is really exciting. Badges are sort of a piece of that, but there's a lot of evolving elements that I think represent a new form of sort of digital transcript that's a lot more flexible, and allows individual learners to really control their own learning, and having a sort of universal passport that I control and I can sort of make use of in the way that best suits my needs. This is a real future, and something I think we're moving towards, and helping shape. Groups like this are certainly a part of helping shape some of this. So we have this sort of new evolving transcript that is certainly digitally focused and student-centered in a lot of ways. And on top of that, this idea of sort of a more liquid credential that can flow among different learning opportunities and different pathways and potential employment opportunities. We also have this sort of broader marketplace that can exist, and skills, abilities, other things can start to sort of flow in and out of a marketplace that sits around each individual learner, and isn't necessarily a singular controlled sort of centralized process. We have a lot of centralized bodies currently that sort of dictate and in often cases mandate how some of that sort of sharing and ultimate opportunities come to be. And I think we're seeing a marketplace evolve that is a little more fluid and really takes into account unique learning and unique skills and opportunities that each of us, there's just so much subjectivity that is involved in learning that I think there has to be change that allows for that sort of broader ecosystem that allows the flexibility and the personalization that really matters. So again, this is very broad framing. There's sort of more tangible pieces that sit underneath all of this, and I'm going to dig into some actual projects and pilots that are evolving. But those two pieces are important. A sort of digital student-owned passport, as well as an evolving marketplace, of which libraries are certainly a big piece of. Touched on this a little bit. There's also a pretty exciting sort of movement in many spaces around this idea of self-sovereignty. The SSI community broadly and certainly globally is blossoming with a lot of new technology. And this really views the student, learner, or individual sort of sitting at the center of how a lot of this takes place. So it's no longer sort of at the central institution level where my degree or transcript ultimately is sort of being disseminated, but it really can start to be something where I'm in control, and I can curate the ways in which opportunities and specific skill sets get disseminated. So it's I'll happy to dig into also some of the technology as we look at some case studies of how that happens. But as sort of the broader I would say trustless data economy evolves around us, we know there's just a sort of growing concern and sort of often groundswell around these big tech bodies, whether it be Facebook or Google or Amazon or any any other sort of big centralized body that is in control of data. This would be flipping that entire model and bringing a lot of that control back to the individual. So self-sovereignty sits at the center of, I think, the future of education, and certainly with regards to trust. This is at least a sort of high-level model of how this might look. This is Open Badges and Badger, which is the two logos down at the bottom there. This is sort of a model put out by a company, Concentric Sky, that's working on some of this. But I think this is a good broad model of how this sort of ecosystem can play out, where my representation of learning can really occur in many different ways. At traditional institutions, libraries should be represented on here, and they're not. But you can see you can get the idea, where all of those potential opportunities sort of come to me into personalized backpack in this case. But the sort of backpack or wallet or passport metaphor is used quite a bit. Bringing all those into something that I ultimately control and can curate, and then my decision sort of on how I ultimately disseminate those out into different groups, whether it be into social circles, into other communities, or directly into employment opportunities. Very different model than the traditional institution. I learn, I get a degree, and that goes directly, probably in a PDF into a job application. This kind of blows up that model and really allows for more fluidity. So the hope is that we move from this system that sort of exists currently to something that, and again, completely oversimplified. I understand that there's a lot of work to be done to allow this to happen, but as we build out these different opportunities and systems, you can think of sort of each of those yellow teeth representing a different sort of node in this broader ecosystem that's evolving. And as some of that takes shape, we can start to create a model that really starts to connect these directly and allows it to be a clear process of sort of how I can navigate this education to work and just sort of lifelong, life-wide ecosystem. So that's oversimplified, but that's the grand vision that I hope to work towards. It's certainly, I think, where my focus is going to be, for decades to come. I really am passionate about trying to work towards having this all play out. I think we're at an exciting juncture point. So that being the case, it's not without concerns and challenges, and want to just lay some of those out to be transparent about where some of the problems could potentially surface. We certainly have regulation. So having spent a little bit of time working on policy at the Department of Ed, these are very real challenges. How do institutions adjust to potentially adjusting regulations at the both federal and state level to accommodate some of these changes? How do we ensure that all populations are both a part of the conversation and helping shape how this plays out, but also not left behind, and there's not greater gaps being created with new opportunities and new technologies. So those are just a few policy considerations. And then I think it's just worth taking note here, and I'll certainly be happy to share this deck so we can reference and you can go sort of do some research if you want to dig into some of these other groups. But just the interoperability, there's a lot of work being done in a number of areas to understand how to really start to bridge systems and institutions that traditionally have not really communicated well. We know the issue of siloing that exists in education. So these are just a few of the communities that are sort of open for engagement currently. Hyperledger is a technology built, sort of stood up by IBM. So I and others are currently part of an education architecture special interest group, working again towards architecting some of this sort of future we envision. The T3 Innovation Network I mentioned, that's a national coalition of over 300 companies that are all pooling together resources and expertise to, in fact, I was just in Chicago yesterday for their annual meeting. That's sort of funneled through the Chamber of Commerce Foundation, but broad group of leaders that really want to see some of this work evolve. The White House actually just released a white paper that discusses this idea of an interoperable learning record, ILR. So that's a term to be aware of. There's competing acronyms currently. A lot of movement around this idea of a CLR, comprehensive learner record. This sort of touches on a lot of what I went through, but there's a number of groups now working towards also this idea of interoperable learning records. So not only is it comprehensive and really provides that sort of life-wide perspective, but also very interoperable. And so I can, take a skill from an opportunity at a library where I picked up some information, and that's easily interoperable, directly into a traditional school, college, university. So that interoperation is critical. And then ADL is through the Department of Defense, but the Department of Defense is working along a similar path to provide opportunities to those in the military and those sort of transitioning out of the military. So a few areas to investigate. Social impact implications for sure. These are just a few questions. I think the big one there for me is the last one, ensuring that sort of data stewardship and how do I participate as a digital citizen effectively, and there's going to be likely more responsibility in this sort of vision years from now. I think there is certainly more responsibility that falls on the individual. So it's incumbent upon those that are already educating. That certainly falls on this group and others that sort of already exist in this world of providing good education. But being responsible stewards of data is going to be critical, and just building out infrastructure to allow the education to coincide and run in parallel with some of the evolving technology. So real quick, I'm going to run through these pretty quick, but we've got some projects to look at. I mentioned the Department of Defense work, that's adlnet.gov, the Advanced Distributed Learning project, so certainly worth exploring. ASU, some may be familiar, they have this reverse transfer pilot that is basically looking to provide more mobility for students, credentialing being more sort of backwards compatible and more flexible and fluid. So these things are certainly happening, and these are very real pilots that are playing out. Dallas Community College District, as well as their independent school district, also working on sort of this fluidity of credentialing from high school forward. Again, sort of a range and a suite of technology that's supporting some of this work. The MIT Digital Credentials Consortium is definitely worth peeking at. They've got, I think it's 12 actually, universities globally now that are all working to basically sort of initiate a standard around what a digital credential. This is sort of, you can view badges as sort of being some of the seeds of how this group came together, but basically trying to build out a if not national, global standard around what a digital credential could ultimately be. And so a lot of standards work and a lot of good thinking going on with that project. This is a sort of blown out schematic of block certs, which seeded some of that digital credentialing work. Not going to go deep into this, but I've got a deep interest in Web3 and blockchain technology. I think it sits at the core of a lot of how these new applications will ultimately play out. And so this is a sort of example of how that project sort of started and what a digital credential might look like. Again, don't want to go into the technical details of this, but there's trust and value literally being programmed into the way credentialing is able to be done. So that's the idea there. And then I mentioned sort of just this movement from CLR to ILR, comprehensive learner record to interoperable learning record, ACRO, the T3 network, the White House, as I mentioned, as well as a number of institutions, all sort of looking towards that sort of future. And then something I'm most passionate about, and this is what I'll end on, is an initiative in Colorado. I'm based in Denver, and we're just on the verge of launching what we're calling the C-Lab, Colorado Education Workforce Lab. And it is in partnership with a group called Learning Economy that is really trying to unify the entire internet of education. And this is a fairly new term. I think conceptually, I think it's there. We understand there's a lot of players, but just the way there is now an internet of information, I think we envision a future where there's sort of an internet of education, many players being involved, and we're excited about building out a sort of protocol that leverages some new technology that sits at the center and allows for interoperability and sort of data movement within different systems, all the way from the education to workforce. And that, again, is part of sort of detangling that web of wires and allowing things to, it's really allowing information to flow in a useful way, and provides insight to everybody in the system to not live in our own silos, but understand where value is being created. And really, really amazing and powerful things start to happen when you really can start to unify. And all the pilots I mentioned are, we're learning a lot right now about what changes when we can start to sort of quantify value across this full internet, this full new internet. So that's sort of my passion project at the moment, but happy to dig into some details on that as well at a later point. So that's it. Thank you, everybody, and absolutely happy to chat offline. Feel free to shoot me an email. I'm pretty active on Twitter as well, @TakenDesign, or Taylor @learningeconomy.io. Feel free to shoot me an email, and I'm going to stop sharing, and we can dive into any questions that have come up.
Thanks, Taylor. So if anybody has questions, you can type them directly into the chat, and we will get them kind of thrown out there and start the conversation.
Yeah, the liquidity and different viscosities, I think that's a great way to look at it. How, when should it be liquid? When should credentials be more like oil than water, right? And I think there are reasons to, introduce more or less viscosity depending on the situation. So yeah, I like that framing too. And I think the key for a group like this is just to know that, at least sort of how I see a lot of this evolving, like libraries are left out of the conversation in so many ways. And it's really hard, given some of my background and just knowing the value that can come from that system and that institution. The hope and vision is that as things evolve, that libraries, I can see a time when what libraries represent in the sort of broader education economy, there's no distinction from what they can ultimately provide and the value they afford as a traditional school or university. I can go and spend all my time at a library and ultimately earn the credentials or degree, again, the sort of I can build my passport within the library system and never touch a university. This solves all sorts of other financial problems. I mean, the debt crisis is very real. This is at the heart of a lot of this work, is finding ways to, why is learning the most debt-inducing activity we undertake, when it's the most valuable thing and the most exciting thing any of us get to be a part of. There should be no cost involved. The longer term, a lot of this can ultimately play out into an economy where you earn to learn. There's whole models that we're really excited about that also, not only, and this is, again, we've got some work to do, but in the long term, you can build an entire economy. You can have learn coins. This is the sort of the blockchain and cryptocurrency side of me coming out a little bit, but we're really looking towards the future where I can start to earn and really like derive value straight out of my interest in contributing to a learning ecosystem where society is benefiting. So that's possible.
There's a question from Robin. She said, can you talk more about the initiative in Colorado on your second to last slide? Who are the partners involved?
Yeah, so I was hoping that we would actually have the public page up for this discussion, but it's really close. It's brand new, and more will get a public page up. It's in partnership with the Colorado Department of Higher Education, so there will be a page up there as sort of the state agency partner, and then we'll get a bunch of press releases out and stuff. The idea really is to unify the state and create an entire ecosystem that starts to explore a lot of this work. The partners are nearly infinite in those that can be a part of it. Those currently that are directly involved are a number of universities. There's a blockchain alliance within the CU system that's involved. Number of other sort of private partners, as well as employment connections, so we can start to explore some of the interoperability within workforce HR systems. It's an ecosystem sort of project, right? We're really looking to accelerate a state infrastructure into the 21st century. Again, it's going to be a lot of work early on. Quick framing of how it plays out. We'll launch January 30th. And again, this is RSVP and opportunities for those that are in Colorado to participate. It's coming. But we'll launch January 30th. Really, most of this is going to be guided heavily by research and work groups. Research for sort of the first, that'll probably conclude sort of late next year, and then into really building out sustainable pilots, and then ultimately getting schools and employers and libraries and these systems into direct sort of projects that allow this to take shape, and in the end have a implementation report, where and Colorado's not the only state exploring some of this, but I think we've built a really good foundation to allow it to take place. And yeah, as far as like stakeholders and partners, the door's pretty open. It's going to take a lot of coordination. It's something I'm focused on and doing a lot of work towards. But because we're really looking at infrastructure level change, there's sort of there's really nobody that shouldn't be at the table. So it's going to take a broad effort.
Great. I have a question. So I saw a recent article about it was estimated the growth of microcredentialing as an industry and people awarding microcredentials. It said the industry would grow from something like 23 million to 350 million over the next, 5 to 10 years or something like that. Do you agree with that assessment?
I'd say, first of all, it depends on how you define microcredential. I have a really hard time getting tied to any hard numbers. Will it grow? Yes. But will the means in which we sort of define a microcredential kind of fragment as well? Yeah, I think that'll happen as well. So, I mean, I would say, I almost feel like over the 3 to 5, if I look 3 to 5 years down the road, I think it becomes fragmented in an interesting way. But if you, in aggregate, if you were to take, everything that is evolving in sort of the digital credential landscape, of which sort of this idea of micro-credentials fits, then I'd say that I wouldn't have any way arguing that. I think it will be that sort of scale. But I'd have to look deeper at sort of, I'm sure they've done some work to come up with those sort of hard numbers, but I'd have to dig into it a little bit. But I guess the key point is how we view the traditional degree. That is a thing of the past, and I feel comfortable saying that. I know there's some debate around that, sort of the death of the degree, but we're seeing it across the board, in a lot of the biggest companies sort of have already, a lot of them have left degrees in the past and they mean nothing, and in other cases they're really rethinking how to sort of ascribe value to a traditional transcript or degree.
So kind of connected to micro-credentials in this new learning economy, but not completely tied to it, is this idea of micro-learning, which I don't necessarily think are one and the same. We've chunk content, right? We've like chunk content forever, but I think I've been thinking a lot about micro-learning lately, and I think it's different than just chunking content. And the design is different, the affordances are different. So I don't know if you've spent any time thinking about the relationship between micro-credentials and micro-learning, but I've been thinking a little bit about some of the possible like constraints or criticisms of this type of learning. I don't know if you've thought about those at all.
Yeah, I think it's really important to be able to, to demonstrate the value that ultimately, the skill, the knowledge, the behavior that comes at a granular level. Like, I think that does matter. I have classes I can remember where I really loved maybe a single unit or a single even class on a single day that I like, that sticks in my head. I have no way, that's not reflected anywhere, that one individual piece of learning, I just like totally dove into logic. I remember this sort of class, it was a philosophy class, but scoping out sort of logic sequencing. I started to understand like how arguments were formed. It was a micro piece of learning, but I don't have, how that, can ultimately get combined with other sort of small scale learning opportunities that then, leads to a real job or an opportunity, because there's demonstrated interest and value in that unique combination of skills. That's not a part of the current system. So I'd say I love the idea of being able to, quantify and demonstrate those proficiencies on a more granular level. But I also fear a little bit the just sort of, fragmenting and quantizing of our attention span, and everything is, the 24-hour news cycle is now the 5-minute news cycle, and like that sort of movement towards really, losing the sort of the value in deep introspective work, and like really putting time into something, and like really slowing down and understanding a system or a process that might take an entire semester or, months. Like, I do fear that we're just, and this is driven by, social media in large part, but just sort of the gig economy and just the movement and the pace of change. I do fear that as we look at learning in that capacity, we sort of lose track of also the value of like really good deep work. I love Cal Newport has a book and this concept of just sort of deep work and how our attention is really getting fragmented. I think trying to keep that balance, right? Like, how do we quantify it, make it valuable for students to be able to demonstrate at that level, but not lose track of the value of deep work or deep learning.
Kelsey asked, in conversations with academics, I find there's a lot of concern about digital credentials replacing or undermining traditional credentials. Do you think the two can coexist? Will they coexist? Like which one will emerge, in what capacity, those kinds of things?
Yeah, they can. I mean, they currently coexist, right? There are. Go look at the New Mexico Community College system. There's a number of initiatives where entire universities have gone. MIT now has, you can earn a digital diploma. That comes as part of the package. So currently they do coexist. I think they will coexist. There's no question where we're headed. Like the traditional sort of paper transcript is going to go away and will be replaced by, this is the inevitability, whether it's, there are problems with that in some ways. I think it takes really thoughtful folks like this group to be a part of the conversation. But yeah, I mean, we're going just look where we've gone, in the last 5-10 years. I mean, there was a time when the internet itself didn't exist and like information was not digitized and moving at the pace it is. So I think there's an inevitability of the movement towards credentialing being digitized, but they will coexist for some length of time. And I think, there'll probably be things to learn about the traditional degree that's valuable, that we need to make sure is represented as things move that direction. But there's this really great idea of infrastructure inversion that I just really, really love. And it's played out in so many ways. If you look at horses moving to vehicles, if you look any big infrastructure shift, this sort of up and coming always rides on the back of the incumbent infrastructure for a period of time, and then the actual inversion when it switches, when you moved from the horse to the car, it actually happened really fast, but they coexist. So I think credentials are part of this current infrastructure of education, and they're going to kind of run in parallel for some sequence. And then at some point, I think we're going to be pretty amazed to look back and realize that we were actually, handing off paper degrees and transcripts like that. That will go away. I just don't see any way around it.
Okay, we have about 3 minutes left. So I just was wondering, so a lot of the people in the Digital Badges Interest Group are relatively new to this, or kind of just like standing on the periphery. So for someone that is new to the field or wants to get more involved, can you name like your 3 favorite leaders in the field, and then maybe like the top 3 groups that someone should know about or join?
Within sort of credentialing and badging, should I stay in that lane or sort of the?
Yeah, I think
okay.
so. Yeah.
I think I really value that the Digital Credential Initiative out of MIT. Kim Hamilton Duffy is somebody I'm working with on the T3 project. I think she has just done a lot of thoughtful work around how this is playing out. So Kim Hamilton Duffy at MIT, as well as Philip Schmidt is part of the MIT Media Lab. Those are certainly people to mention. A local connection within Colorado would be a good colleague who does a lot of great work in K-12, Noah Geisel. He is at Senior G on some of the social platforms. Also runs the Badge Summit. I think some of this group might be familiar with the Badge Summit. Man, I could run off a long list. I'd say, those are a couple highlights, but certainly reach out. And I'm happy to sort of either dump my Twitter list or others. There's just a lot of really brilliant people that are, really passionate and also, very student focused and just want to ensure as these things unfold that we don't get to the point of, building out a giant centralized system. Facebook it didn't become what it is with very intentional goals of causing problems with elections and with the Cambridge Analytica scandal. Like, these things just sort of happen over time. So I think we're at a point where just good, responsible, well-intentioned, thoughtful people that are helping this move is critical right now. We're on the cusp, so this group represents a part of that, I'd say.
Okay, great. Thanks for your time, Taylor.
Yeah, thank you.
And this presentation is recorded, so we're going to be posting it to our LibGuide and sending it out to people that registered but weren't able to make it for the actual day. And other than that, you can keep an eye on our LibGuide. We'll be sending out our top 3 digital credentialing articles of the semester. We do it in the fall and the spring. And if you're interested in writing a blog post, definitely reach out to Kelsey or myself, and we can get you kind of started and connected with writing that blog post for our LibGuide. And I think Taylor would agree that you can also reach out to him if you have specific questions about his talk.
Yep, absolutely. And I'll throw my email here in the chat real quick.